Please welcome back the director, James Freedman. James, you want to say a few things before we got started with the interrogation?
There's some people I have to thank from New York, many of whom are here tonight. First of all, I want to thank Isaac and the JCC Manhattan for screening the movie. I want to thank Steven Spielberg's Righteous Persons Foundation for their generous grant. My associate producers, Richard Kozarski and my wife, Holly Clayman. Thank you for everything, sweetheart. The sweetheart was for Holly, not Richard. Although Richard's a pretty sweet guy too, actually. Steve Massa, are you here tonight? He's the guy who helped me find all those fun Nickelodeon clips in the movie. My 98-year-old father, Herb Freedman, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and my executive producer, Robert Freedman, who believed in this film from day one. Please give them all a round of applause. In addition to tonight's screening, the film is playing as we speak in Miami. But the reason this screening is so special tonight is because the descendants of some of the people that Carl Laemmle saved have traveled great distances to be here with us. And I would like to have the families please stand up as I call your name. Ludwig Mofelder's family. Emil and Greta Treidel's family. Matt Obenauer's family. Irene and Oscar Hess's family. And Werner and Emma Moss's family. You hear Peter? These families all donated photographs, documents, affidavits to the film, and I'm extremely grateful for their help. The other thing is, as I look at you, I can't help but think, many of you would literally not have been born if it hadn't been for Carl Laemmle. And I feel that Carl Laemmle's humanity lives on in your lives. The other thing, after the, and anyway, thank you so much for being a part of this evening. When the Q&A is over, please come down. I'd like a group picture with the different families. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us tonight, and everyone else who's here too. Let's start with where this came from for you. Why the interest, and how this project got started.
I had just finished my HBO film Glickman and was a week away after 6 months of research of starting a new film when the company I was working for shuttered their feature documentary division. So I was left with nothing after 6 months of work, and I went on the internet, started surfing, looking for any subject that might interest me. And I came across this article about Carl Laemmle fighting Thomas Edison in this thing called the Trust Wars. And I'm a movie buff. I had never heard of this story, and I couldn't believe how fascinating and incredible it was. So I Googled Laemmle again, and then I read this article about how he hired all these women directors. And I Googled him again, and I read this article how he was making Imitation of Life in 1934 about, in part, what it's like to be black in America. And to put that in context, that's 5 years before Gone with the Wind. But then I was completely blown away when I read how he saved all these German Jewish refugees and took on our own U.S. government who was trying to stop him from doing it. And I started asking friends, I said, have you heard of this guy Carl Laemmle? His story's amazing. Nobody had heard of him. One friend knew he had something to do with Frankenstein or Dracula, and that was it. And I said, I can't believe this. This guy is like a real American hero. And people need to learn this guy's story. It's amazing. How did he slip through the cracks of history like he did? And I said, I'm going to make the film, and I did. And hopefully, as it plays, the word of this guy's incredible life will get out.
Now, In LA, there's the Laemmle Theaters, which carries his name, has his name, and it's that's a chain. We don't know much of that here in New York, but it's kind of one of the leading art house chains in the LA scene, like our Lincoln Plaza that was. And when you're going around and trying to tell a story and tell people that you're making a film about Carl Laemmle, how do you find your people? How do you find the people that you brought to this film? Do people know his story? Is this a forgotten hero that has kind of, his story has never really been told in the right way?
Yes, nobody really knows the story. And the people who sort of know, the people at Universal didn't know half this stuff. They knew some of the movie stuff, but they just don't know. They don't know about this guy. And I was, in terms of how I found the people, I'm a research nut. I can't, hire research assistants. I have to do it myself to find the movie. And you would find stuff, and I would find the Shoah Foundation, Spielberg's Foundation donated those archival interviews, and then I would look in the phone book and try and contact, like when you see Ludwig Mofelder, I spoke to his daughter Leslie.
Wait, there are phone books?
Yeah.
There's still phone books?
Well, I guess I still have phone books. And you would just, and the same thing with Max Oberauer's family, and then I found out this guy Fred Bender and Werner Moss, and I was able to interview them in person. And I just, the film historians, there are certain go-to people that are very good, but you just find what will tell this man's story, and that's what you do.
I'm curious specifically, Bob Balaban, who's a member of our community here.
Yeah, he would have been here tonight. He's in France filming a movie.
Where did that come from? How did that connection happen?
I saw another documentary he did, and it said his parents owned Balaban and Katz, the Nickelodeons in Chicago. And his grandparents, they ended up founding more or less Paramount Pictures. And Bob knew all the Nickelodeon history along with Peter Bogdanovich, who was kind enough to donate his movie Nickelodeon, and Ron Meyer of the Universal was kind enough to donate all those incredible high-def prints of Frankenstein and Dracula and all their stills. So that's basically it. You just research and see who's talking about anything that can apply.
After studying all of this, where do you see most prominently Carl Laemmle's impact on the film industry today that's still there?
I think when you see all those people that he helped give their start to, and you see all the films of John Ford and William Wyler and all the monster movies that live on and on. I remember I was in, at the time called Yugoslavia a long time ago, and I was in some discotheque, and they had all the American icons on a wall, and it was Bogart and Marilyn Monroe and the Monsters. They're just known all over the world. So I think cinematically, the whole look of German expressionism in these films, it changed the industry when they started making movies like that. American people weren't doing it.
I would love to take some questions from the audience and be a part of the conversation. We'll pass the microphone around.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Netzer, and my grandmother was Regina Stern Culp, and I think Resha Stern was her first cousin, and it's because of that relationship that my parents were able to come here, and I would never have been born, and I knew the story of Carl Laemmle, but that he signed affidavits for my extended family. But I'm so moved by your film, and I knew about that he started Universal Pictures and Frankenstein, but thank you so much for this film.
Thank you. She was talking about Carl's wife, Resha Stern.
What happened to the son?
Junior ended up leading kind of a tragic ending. He never made a movie again, and Irving Thalberg hired him under a deal at MGM for a year, but he never made anything. And he had what would now, they didn't know this at the time, but probably was MS. And they didn't know it, and he had a very sad ending to his life where he was still gambling and selling his paintings, going to the hock shops. And Richard Koszarski interviewed, who's here tonight, interviewed Junior, I think in 1973. Is that right, Richard? Yeah. And he was living with someone who was taking care of him, and it was kind of a very difficult end to Junior's life. The nice part about that people didn't forget, John Huston, who the director and writer who Laemmle gave his first writing job to, or one of his first, and William Wyler, these people always visited Junior, even in the later years when they were big, big directors. But it was a sad ending to Junior's life.
So Jimmy, here's my question. Your first documentary about Glickman, which was equally awesome, there's clearly a thread through both of these about Jewishness. So where do you think that comes from? Does it come from Herbie, or?
I have to answer this question perfectly because I'm staying at my brother-in-law's house tonight. I don't want to upset him. You know, I didn't set out to make a Jewish film in either instance. I don't know if anyone saw Glickman, but to me that was a movie about what happens to an 18-year-old kid's dreams when they're crushed by racism and prejudice. He happened to be Jewish. And in this film, I wasn't looking to make a Jewish film either, and you could have just made a film about Carl Laemmle's movie career, but it's really what he did, and that led me to that. So it wasn't by any design whatsoever. I just love the stories of both those guys, and I love the fact that I could bring this to the public where they would learn more about these remarkable men. Because when you make a documentary, it's 3 years of your life in the editing room. You're looking at these people all the time. And then people have come to me to ask to do documentaries on people I don't admire. And I said, I don't want to spend that time. And it's hard enough at 3 in the morning to look at all this Nazi footage and get to bed, you know? And it's really about that, Jed. I was not setting out to make a Jewish film. I was setting out to make a story about a man who had incredible humanity.
Well, I'd like to really thank you so much for this film because it fills in so much of the history and my family's connection to Carl Laemmle. I've always known about him because my parents came to this country because of my grandparents' connection to Carl Laemmle. They had a connection through Ischenhausen, which I found out was where Carl Laemmle had an apprenticeship.
I had to cut that from the film.
Yes.
He was 14 and sent away from home, and he was crying. He was like a mama's boy, and he worked for I'm forgetting the name now off the top of my head, in Ischenhausen.
Ischenhausen, yes, and that's where my mother was born, and of course her parents. And I would always hear the story. My grandfather was a cantor in that town. And I was always told that Carl Laemmle would come back and home and visit with relatives and would try to persuade my grandfather to come to Hollywood because of his voice, really. And, you know, my grandparents laughed it off. But having seen the film and how he extended himself to so many people, you know, the great family of Carl Laemmle had, I realized maybe that really was not such a big joke after all. But through your film, I understand now why he wasn't able to sponsor my grandparents and my parents coming to this country because he was already oversubscribed because of the government's limit on what he could do. And so he was able to contact his good friend Joe Pasternak, and I still have that letter of Joe Pasternak's and his sponsorship of my parents coming to this country. It's just a tremendous knowledge and eye-opener for me.
You know, if I just might say, I had to cut that part out of the film, and I'm usually asked, what's your favorite thing you had to cut from the film? It's not necessarily a favorite thing. I think it was William Faulkner who said, you know, you have to, when you create a story, kill your darlings. And one of the stories that I did have to cut for time is, I don't know if anyone had ever heard the saga of the SS St. Louis, also called the Voyage of the Damned. for those who don't know, in 1939, 900 plus Jews set sail from Germany to Cuba with the guarantee they would be let into Cuba to get away from Nazi Germany. And during the time they sailed, Joseph Goebbels was stirring up so much anti-Semitism in Cuba that by the time they landed, the Cubans would not let them get off the ship, and they were stuck in the port. And Carl Laemmle, who knew the Cuban officials because when he ran away from Edison's goons and filmed in Cuba, he knew all these people. So he wrote to these people, he tried to bribe the Cuban officials, all to no avail. And the ship set sail, then headed for the United States, and was literally 2 miles off the coast of Miami. They could see the palm trees. And the United States government, the Roosevelt administration, would not let them in. And so Carl Laemmle sent a telegram to FDR, and I got a copy of this, and when I saw it, I said, well, this is definitely going to be in the film when you're first starting out. And in the telegram, he talks about how, to FDR, he says, your power, my power as compared to you is that of a child. Won't you please help these poor, suffering people? And of course, Roosevelt turned the ship away. He did not, and the ship had to go back to Europe, and many of those passengers died in the Holocaust.
Unbelievable film, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm guessing you started this more than 2 years ago? Is that fair?
3 years now.
So you would not have known what you see today. And it feels like there are very distressing parallels to what you saw back then. What kind of distribution can you get of this film nationwide so that people see we've been here before? And we don't want to return to that.
Let me answer that in 2 ways. The first is, people always say, why'd you make this film? Why is it relevant today? And to me, Carl Laemmle was such a mensch, he was such an inspirational figure that you always want to see pictures about people like that. But more importantly, with so much divisiveness in this country over the issue of immigration, I simply said, what better time than to make a movie about an immigrant who helped make America great? The answer to the second question is, it's as I said, it's playing in Miami tonight. It's going to be playing all over the world at Jewish film festivals. It'll be in the United States. It's in San Francisco and San Diego and Denver, and it's going to be playing in Westchester in April. I have a website, carllemlethefilm.com. It keeps a tab. You can see stuff that's not in the film and some photos of him with Babe Ruth and Amelia Earhart and stuff like that. But and then I've been talking to distributors as it will build up word of mouth and go around the world, and people will see this. So it probably, during this year, I'll know more as it keeps playing. But thank you.
I want to say from the JCC's perspective that this film, we did not take this on its Jewish merit. I think there's a film there beyond it that I think is a fascinating story, and the Jewish world is just one little piece of the pie that I think this film can reach, and definitely goes way beyond. And the 10 minutes at the end that really bring it some very powerful moments are a wonderful connection, but it should not limit the film at all.
Thank you. I just have to say thank you so much, Jim. I come from Fort Lee, New Jersey. I live on the block where Laemmle had his first studio, The Champion. We fought to save that studio when it came down a few years ago, and what we put in its place at the end of that street is a sign called Carl Laemmle Way. Now you made my street a very special place. I knew how hard he fought the trusts, and now I understand he used those skills to save people, and that's an amazing story. And I'd like to invite you, Richard knows this, we're in the process of building a 260-seat cinema and a film museum on Main Street, not far from where Carl Laemmle's second studio was. We'd love to have you when we open next year, and we'd love to showcase his career in terms of a museum exhibit and your film. So we'd love to honor Carl Laemmle.
We don't have to negotiate my fee now, do we?
We'll work on that.
Oh, can I just say one thing before you ask your next question, sir? You were talking about what you think of Laemmle there, And people say also, what was your favorite part about Carl, you know? And to me, it was that it can be done motto of his, because, you know, if he's fighting the powerful Edison Trust, and he can't show his movie in the theaters, he shows it on a raft in the Ohio River. If he's being sued 289 times, he steals away Mary Pickford. But it was that it can be done spirit that he used against our own U.S. government to save these lives. Because if he had not done that, if he didn't have that internal, and he didn't really, you know, it was all that letter to Cordell Hull. I just love that, because he's using his way to sort of say, I know what's up here, and if you want to run for president, let these people in, you know. And the Oberauer family is here today because of that.
I just saw a glimpse of the name Udo Bayer in the credits. And I know he wrote a definitive biography in German.
And you haven't...
I don't know if it was ever translated.
Yeah, I read the translation, and it's not a good translation. It's very boring because of the translation, not what Udo wrote. He passed away before I got a chance to meet with him. But he was the German expert on Carl Laemmle, and he talked about a thing called Laemmle's List, and the people on that list were the people he saved. It would be affidavits.
We have been in touch with his widow,
Yeah.
Gabi, and I just wonder whether she's aware of this film and whether she could.
I had emailed her a long time ago, and I don't know the answer to that, but she will become aware of it.
Jim, I also want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this wonderful tribute to Carl Laemmle. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother also was from Laupine, and indirectly he wrote to the people who sponsored my parents and I to get an affidavit because he no longer was able to, as you brought out. What impressed me the most always, and does to this day, and I think about it often, is his humanitarianism. First and foremost, whatever he did in Hollywood, that's really what counted the most. And I'm just wondering, have you brought this, your movie to the attention of the Holocaust Museum in Washington?
Not in Washington, but they know of the movie. And,
Okay, because
yeah,
I say that because several years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, I have a contact in the museum. They had no idea of Laemmle at all. And I brought it to someone there. Her name is Judy Cohen. And she researched it, and I brought her in contact with Udo Bayer. And
we can connect you guys after the screening.
Pardon me?
We can connect you both after the screening. You can share the information. We're going to take one last question up there on top.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for introducing me and all of us to this incredible man. I just turned my attention to my friends who are film buffs. They never heard of him, so thank you so much. He's absolutely extraordinary, and another woman talked about the timeliness of this film. I'm so unimpressed that Universal Studios, who had such an incredible founder, hasn't kept this man's legacy alive, and particularly at this particular time in Hollywood. What are they doing to resurrect the knowledge about this incredible founder? And what are you doing to the Oscars so they can, you know, pay tribute to this incredible individual on so many accounts?
Well, I can't talk to Universal other than to say they donated all their stills, 3,000 stills they had access to, Ron Meyer there, and they donated all those incredible movies to me, and so I could make this film. And Ron Meyer, who's the head of Universal, his first job in Hollywood was being the driver for Paul Kohner, who's in the movie. And Paul Kohner was brought over with William Wyler from Europe in the 20s. So Ron Meyer knew about Carl Laemmle. He didn't know much more than that because Paul Kohner had always talked to him about that. But I can't answer what they're doing about that. I don't know. I don't work there. But.
Before we leave, let me ask you one last question. What is your hopes that now that the audience has learned about Carl Laemmle so much, what is your hopes that will come of this? What are your hopes that the audiences will do? What should their reaction be?
You know, when you're researching something like this and you see he did this and he did this and you almost get shamed that, you know, I'm sitting on my couch watching a basketball game every night, you know, and this guy. And you know, you hope it spurs people the better part of themselves. I don't know if movies do that or not, but that's the hope. And, you know, when it gets out in public release later this year, I think, you know, again, with what's going on in the world, it's really great to see. How can you not love this guy? I mean, you know, it's like this guy's a real hero, a flesh and blood hero, not an action hero. And what he did, anybody can do. It's just refusing to say no until you do the right thing. And that's what I really hope, that people would be a little more persistent in helping those who need help. But on another level, just to bring his story, I can't control that, so let them take from it what they will, you know. But I want to thank everyone for coming. This was wonderful. Will the descendants, please, all the families, all come down. I want to get a picture with you. Thank you very much. It's a lovely meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, James. And I hope to see you at the screening soon. Have a